So I have a question for you.
Okay, thank God. Okay.
Okay, so recently Donald Trump signed an executive order asking the IRS to not enforce the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment disallows religious organizations, primarily churches, from taking part in political activities or political speech with as long as they remain tax exempt. So this was largely celebrated by the Christian right as a religious freedom win, if you will. So it's largely connected, I would say, to two other cases. One of which is a very famous Hobby Lobby case, where the Supreme Court ruled that Hobby Lobby, specifically, but more generally, closely held companies are allowed to, I'm going to show my cards here, are allowed to discriminate against employees by not doing things they find religiously abhorrent. So, for instance, with Hobby Lobby, as a far-right Neanderthalic Christian company, did not want to have their insurance plans cover birth control for their female employees. The Supreme Court ruled in Hobby Lobby's favor, unfortunately.
Correctly.
Fuck you. So also connected to.
I need to wear my troll hat. And I have my bridge that I sit under.
I'm gonna wear my pink pussy hat, and you're gonna wear your troll hat.
Mm-hmm.
So
Paper mache bridge.
Then you cannot cross. Is that Billy Gruff? Anyway,
It
so
is
then
really good stuff. Mm-hmm.
I was in that play in second grade. I played
No
goat
costume needed.
Fuck you. I played goat number 2.
Uh-huh.
So, and finally, and this is probably the case that we would want to spin off of the most, because I think it's the one that people actually talk about now the most, or currently. A case in Oregon where a far-right Christian couple, let's call them Governor and Mrs. Huckabee, they owned a bakery, something like Melissa's Sweets and Homophobic Treats, and they refused to bake a cake for a lesbian wedding, which I have to lay my cards out. A little surprised that the lesbians couldn't bake the cake themselves, but that's neither here nor there. So we've talked about this a little bit offline. So I guess I want to start with a fairly open-ended question, which is, where does religious liberty and religious free speech end and discrimination begin?
Oh, I mean, I think they can be often fairly contiguous. So if my religious belief is that homosexuals are, or that homosexuality is a sin, and thus I don't want to associate with homosexuals because I group them with thieves and murderers and child molesters and all other sorts of criminals and perverts, I think in that case my discrimination or my discriminatory, my exercise of me being discriminatory is an outgrowth of my religious beliefs. Sure. Often, so yeah, I mean, I guess one could say the same thing about race and gender, right? If I discriminate on the basis of sex, on some idea that the Bible mandates certain roles for men and certain roles for women, my discrimination there is an outgrowth of my religious belief. If I discriminate against people of different races on the basis of some belief that all people of darker skin descend from the line of Ham or something and are cursed for that reason. That is, it's also an outgrowth of religious belief. Yeah, so I don't think there's necessarily a clean separation of the two.
Okay, so maybe a little to drill down on it a little bit. We don't allow legally businesses that serve the public, that serve the general public, to discriminate on the basis of race or sex. So I, as a white man, cannot be turned away from eating lunch at Panera Bread in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which I do sometimes.
When have white men ever been turned away from a sandwich
Honey,
shop?
it is, my burden is heavy. I don't know if you've read Atlas Shrugged. We carry the world on our shoulders.
Trust me, you are not one of the producers. No.
True. Okay, so do businesses have the right, through appeals to religious free speech and religious freedom more generally, to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation? Why or why not?
Under current law, or do I believe they should or should not?
We can go both. We can
Like,
talk about both. I mean, it's not a current law. I mean, current law, it's a little bit up in the air.
Sure, and it's going to vary from state to state and locale to locale, I believe. The question is always being, to what extent are gay people a protected class, are homosexuals a protected class? I mean, generally, I think that, okay, so I have a fairly unpopular, or let's just call it marginal opinion here.
Will Stockton, CFO of Fred Phelps Carpet Cleaners Incorporated. Go on.
Which is that we have competing interests, right? We have an interest in protecting freedom of association. We have an interest in protecting freedom of religious exercise. And we have an interest in, I think, just a general liberal interest in discouraging discrimination. It is not clear to me that our interest in discouraging discrimination overrides freedom of association or the free exercise of religion. And I would tend to say that both rights trump people's right not to be discriminated against, as long as they are not therein being aggressed against, right? So there's a difference in not baking you a cake or not letting you eat a sandwich in my shop and beating you up, right? I would say the first...
How badly do I want the cake?
The first is, if you want to be a dick and not bake somebody a cake, that's fine. And I'm inclined to just say, we'll let the market deal with you. And, you know, your Yelp reviews will turn bad because you're discriminatory, unless you've got a pretty big base of fundamentalist Christian supporters who will keep you in business. And that's fine. I mean, if all you want to associate with is heterosexuals, as long as you're not beating heterosexuals up or homosexuals up, that's fine with me. If you are, I think that there's only a decent case for the state to get involved when people are being physically aggressed against. So, for instance, with you being beat up.
Okay, so, and I don't want to go this route, but I'm going this route, of a slippery slope argument. So, at what point... Well, okay, so are doctors in private practice for them? Like, are they considered a private business if they're in a private practice for themselves?
I mean, yes, to the extent that any medical operation or doctor in this country actually operates free of government interference. Sure.
Okay, so yes, they are licensed by the state. But
Sure.
generally, once doctors get licensed, and if they open up their own private practice, which is pretty expensive to do, which is why most people don't, but they are generally left alone by the state. But does a doctor have the right to refuse to treat a gay person?
Well, that might be a violation of his or her Hippocratic oath.
Which they're not bound by law. They're bound by I think, the
Okay.
American Medical Association to uphold.
I don't believe in compelling people to do things, generally. So, no, I don't believe in compelling a doctor who has religious objections to, or has just objections to treating gay people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in compelling him or her to perform a service.
Okay, so let's go another hypothetical deeper
Well, no,
than
let
that
me let
then.
me just put this back onto you. Okay, so you're baking. What are you doing? You have no real marketable skills. So,
This house didn't decorate itself, I'll have you know.
no, okay, keep going with your hypothetical, and then
Okay, so
I know you're trying to put me into a corner.
to
But
drill down a,
I'll just lay out my cards. If we're just putting out our cards on the table, no, I think freedom of association and religious liberty sets the bar for discrimination ordinances extremely high, extremely high. And generally, people should be, I think in almost all cases, people should be free to discriminate for whatever reason. And I mean, we discriminate all the time, but we're discriminating against protected classes as long as they are not physically aggressing against those persons. So if you want to hate homosexuals, or you want to hate black people, or you want to hate women, that's fine with me, I guess, as long as you're not beating them up, as long as you are not actively aggressing against them in terms of stealing their property or damaging their person. But if all you're doing is saying, I don't want to rent to them, or I don't want to bake a cake for them, or I don't want to do X service for them,
okay.
I think you're within your rights to do so as an autonomous individual. And to say otherwise is to say that I, especially as a third party, have the right to aggress against you to perform a service for someone else. And that I'm unwilling to do. I'm unwilling to say because you're a dick and you hate homosexuals for whatever stupid reason you do, that you, and they don't hate homosexuals. That's hyper.
Yes, they
No. Well, let's take if you have a whites only sign in your sandwich shop in Missouri, right? I can think, wow, you're a terrible person, but I'm not sure about what right I have to go in and say that you, in your sandwich shop, which you set up and run, that you have to serve to people of all races. I don't think that's within my rights.
even though the state provides business licenses and allows businesses to set up and do
I
business.
don't believe the state should provide business licenses.
Okay. So there's maybe a root problem.
Right. The state's always going to be the root problem.
So what you're saying is leave it up to a market solution. So the market will take care, and I would be I mean, I don't agree.
No,
I don't agree with
hold
that
on. I
solution.
don't think it'll always take care of discrimination. No, because I'm under no delusion that people will stop being discriminatory. I'm under no delusion that racism will vanish one day, or that human beings will cease to be tribal and irrational. That I don't believe for a second.
Well,
But I also don't believe that I have the right to aggress against you because what I believe that you are doing is dickish.
but do you think that these laws, so do you think that the goal of anti-discrimination laws is to morally end discrimination, or do you think it's to guarantee the provision of basic goods and services to everyone? So for instance, let's say let's take a state in the Jim Crow South. So let's take Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama, we overturn. Is it the 1960? Where is racial?
1964 Civil Rights Act.
Yes,
Public accommodations. Yeah.
1964. And let's say this is now extended to gay people too. So this is the issue. The 1964 Civil Rights Act is what's being evoked often today
Uh-huh.
as the precedents for not allowing discrimination against gay people. But let's say I'm a black person and I live in the state of Alabama. I was born there. I was raised there. And all of a sudden, because you think that you, being you, Will Stockton individually, you convince the
Sovereign individual. That's how you address me.
sovereign supreme leader, Will Stockton, believe that the 1964 Civil Rights Act is inherently unconstitutional. So you overturn it, which you would do.
It might.
Stop
I don't know
talking
if it's
to other
unconstitutional.
people.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
No, not you can talk. I thought you were like chatting with other people, and I was like, focus.
Squirrel. I don't know if it's unconstitutional.
Are you Googling
That's
this?
not. Huh?
Are you Googling?
No. I mean, I'm not enough of a constitutional scholar to know if that is an argument that I would want to make. I am generally just saying that I don't believe that I have a right. This all comes back to what I am unwilling to do, and I think it's outside the scope of my power. I am unwilling to tell you that, or use force to compel you to be a better person than you are. Right? Unless you are physically damaging someone, right? You're not just denying service to black people, but every time a person of color walks by your sandwich shop,
Nobody
you're
is
kicking them in the
arguing.
face.
Nobody is arguing that is okay. What I am arguing, or what we are arguing, is the provision of basic goods and services like food, lodging, medical care, etc., that are protected in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so
But the 1964 Civil Rights Act goes much farther than providing basic services. It is an attempt to correct for, I mean, this is the very positive spin on it, right? It is an attempt to correct for state-sponsored and state-enforced segregation within the Jim Crow South, right?
Right.
So it reverses state-enforced segregation with state-enforced non-discrimination.
right. And you're saying that that's wrong.
I mean, in terms of moments in history that I want to relitigate, the 1964 Civil Rights Act is pretty low on the list. But do I think that in terms of balancing people's rights of property and association, that the better answer would have been to just nullify segregation laws? Yes. And to leave people free to discriminate with their own property? Yes.
So what changes there, though?
What do you mean what changes?
So just because...
Is it if you, D. Gilson, operator of a sandwich shop in Jefferson City, Missouri, wants to hang up a whites only sign, you can do that.
Right, and I'm saying, what is the difference between that being allowed and what was allowed in the Jim Crow South? There's not a difference.
The state's not going to. No, there is a difference insofar as the state will protect your right to discriminate, but it will not. It will not enforce the segregation of public buildings, public offices, all sorts of public facilities.
Oh, okay, right. So that is surely.
But if you as a private actor running your own business wants to run a whites only business, I think that's within your right.
Oh, Jesus.
I think that's
okay.
I don't think you're a good person. In fact, I think you're a loathsome person.
Obviously,
But
I would hope.
I don't think I have the right to tell you you can't run a whites only business. So, for instance, let's just play with a hypothetical, right? You are a I have a hard time seeing the difference between a business and a home, right? So, you in your home, if you want to, you can have only white people come over to your house, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you can have like a quiet whites only policy where you just only ever invite white people over to your house. You can even hang a
I live in
sign
New
out.
England. I know this well.
I know, so it's you kind of have to.
Yes.
Um, or you could hang a sign outside your door that says whites only permitted. Um, People will think ill of you. Fortunately, most people nowadays will think ill of you if they catch wind of the fact that you have a whites only policy in your house. But generally, you are recognized as having the ability within the space of the home that you own and operate to discriminate, right? And you
Hmm.
can still receive state services on that basis. So even if you have a whites only sign hanging on your door, the police are still going to come to your door if you call them. The fire department is still going to put
Right.
out. Hold on, I'm not done. The fire department is
I was
still
just
going to
agreeing with
put
you.
out your fire. You are still going to be able to drive on public roads. You are still going to be able to receive all manner of state services, um, even though you are a horrible bigot, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't make sense to me why that allowance, that recognition that you have a basic freedom of association right as a citizen, changes when money changes hands. So it's not clear to me why that happens. So if you turn your home into a I don't know, you start selling baked goods
Hmm.
out of your kitchen, or you take in kids to run a daycare, and you keep your whites only sign up, all of a sudden this other legal apparatus kicks into place simply because money is changing hands. That's all, and that's the only thing that's changed, right? In fact, if you wanted to give away your baked goods and still say whites only, that's fine. If you want to take care of other people's children for free and run a free daycare, that's fine. The state's going to allow you to do that and have a whites only policy. But if you say, I'm going to charge $20 an hour to take care of your kid, or these muffins, these whites only muffins cost
Do they
a
taste
dollar
bland?
fifty, huh?
They taste really bland, the whites only
Well,
muffins.
you never use chocolate chips,
This,
right? You're post chocolate chips.
and they
So,
have no spices.
so all of a sudden it becomes illegal, and we stop thinking he's just a bad person whom maybe we should all try to avoid because he's a terrible bigot, to this person must be cracked down upon by the state. And that
Okay.
doesn't make sense to me.
Well, okay. So one of the things that I would just say in response to that, um,
It's this like horrified look on your face.
well,
With your white flour
I'm
only
thinking
muffins.
about how bad those whites only muffins would taste. They'd be the
Just white
driest,
flour
most
and
bland motherfucking muffins you've ever tasted in your life. Um, Although they're probably gluten free and made with all organic flour, to be fair. Um, so one of the arguments that can be made, um, so you're working within a state system. So you're not going to come
Well,
back
y'all
at me with the state shouldn't exist. None of these things under the state should exist. So you're already agreeing to work within a state system of like, we have businesses, we open up blah blah blah. We have roads to drive on. The state provides things like fire departments and whatever.
do.
Okay. So one of the reasons the state exists in the first place is to facilitate the capitalist market. And in this country, that capitalist market is guaranteed by a constitution and bill of rights, which also would argue that everyone is allowed the basic rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which have been used,
Smuggling in a lot of things here.
which
First
have
of all, we
been
just got to back up and define our terms. What do you mean by capitalist?
a market economy where we don't barter, where the form of, I mean, we barter all this, yes,
Sure.
we barter like goods and services, but for the most part, we exchange money for goods and services. That money is backed by a state apparatus. That state apparatus also includes protections for, it includes not only protections for consumers, but also businesses and
Right.
other.
So smuggled into your notion of capitalism is a state. And that's something I would just take issue with.
Well,
It's
right.
not smuggled in, it's fairly explicit.
Without the state,
So
capitalism doesn't exist. It
no,
is.
that's absurd. All I mean when I talk about capitalism or when I think about the word capitalism, I just think of voluntary exchange. Two people making an exchange for their mutual betterment, right? A voluntary trade. So you have a muffin, I have $1.50. Well, let's say I don't have $1.50. Let's say I have a chicken. You have a muffin, I have a chicken. At the moment, your muffin is worth more to me than the chicken. My chicken is worth more to you than the muffin, so we trade. We have made a voluntary exchange. That's what I think of when I think of capitalism. Now, there are all sorts of ways to protect this voluntary trade, but I don't think I don't think the state is the only one. The state is certainly one, but I don't think the state is the only one.
Right.
And part of the contradiction that you're going to get to is that you're going to claim that in order to protect this voluntary trade, we need to prohibit other people from making voluntary trades.
No, well, no. What I'm trying to get to, because it was based off of one thing you said, which was you don't understand how just because money exchanges hands, the the very existence of money is state-sanctioned capitalism, right? So the exchange,
because the state controls the money supply at present, that is largely true.
well, money doesn't exist without a state, whether
That's absurd. No.
it.
If
Sure,
if you and I live in an anarcho-capitalist society that simply trades in, it's not going to be chickens, because it's a vegan anarcho-capitalist society.
Obviously, semi-precious rubies. I love jewels.
It's going to be some sort of good, right? Some sort of good that has a
value.
A value behind it, right?
Well,
a
right.
Sort of community recognized.
So
this can be gold, right?
That's money
like
in a very loose sense of the word money, but in a contemporaneous way that we use money, it is state-backed currency.
That is currently the way money functions, but that's certainly not the only thing money is.
I would have to know better the definition of money.
Well, money is just something that can hold value, right, in place and can be traded for other things. So if you and I do want to live in an anarcho-capitalist society that trades in chickens, we can do that. If we want to trade in bags in clamshells, we can do that. Mm-hmm. Those clamshells just have to be recognized as having a certain amount of value attached to them, so that you can go trade the clamshells in for 4 chickens, or you can trade the clamshells in for 3 bags of rice.
Man,
I mean,
that sounds like the type of society I want to live in. It sounds fucking awesome. So anyway, can we at least agree that
I did make this sound kind of primitive? Yeah.
Well, maybe that's because it's a primitive idea, but I mean, don't want to go out on a limb and say that or anything, but the idea that we're going to live in a society where clamshells equal dollars.
It doesn't have to be clamshells. You can have, I mean, right?
I know it could be anything. It could be could be pure gold. Would maybe be the like.
Sure.
I know you love the gold standard. So
if I pan left, you will see all my gold bars.
Wiretap brought to you.
You might know the term unbanked, right? All of my money is simply in gold bars in the side of my house over here.
Is it guarded by Milton?
Chewy right now. Who was laying on the carpet. Anyhow.
Hi, Chewy. So, but can we at least agree that the contemporary sense, the most basic sense that we have of the term money today is that it is a state-backed commodity that we use to move within a capitalist marketplace?
Sure, that is the way money mostly functions today. Sure.
Okay. So money, given that it is a state-backed commodity, the
Fiat
state
money.
has some say in how money is tendered and used and exchanged and et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
So I would think at that point, the state is fully within its means to come in and say, and to set up non discrimination laws. So to say that the exchange of goods and services for state backed money cannot be allowed or disallowed based on sex, gender, race, sexuality, etc.
But that doesn't make any sense if I can still use the police to protect me and pay in tax dollars for their services and continue to discriminate against people of color or women, what have you. Sure, if you want to make, or let me put this a different way. If you want to make the case that one of the reasons that non-discrimination is, or non-discrimination laws are permissible is because they trade in money, and money is backed by the government. All you've done is come up with yet another statist reason to encourage non-discrimination or to justify non-discrimination laws. And I'm that's not a project that I'm interested in. You've just strengthened the power of the state.
Hmm. But at the end of the day, what are you typing? What is that noise?
It's my pen.
Oh, that I was like,
I'm
um,
using it. I'm using it to write my boys only sign.
no girls allowed. Um, we'll
Well,
stop
okay.
to
Let me back up, right?
okay.
Because and this goes back to like this is like one of my in terms of, and again in terms of like pieces of legislation that I would be eager to relitigate. The 1964 Civil Rights Act is near the bottom of that list.
That's good. At least that's a start. We don't.
Right.
Most
I'm
of us
not
sensible people would argue that we just don't need to revisit it. That it's a starting point,
you the
and
one
we.
who brought it up. You.
That's true. Okay,
I was just sitting
that's
here.
true.
Um, but if the question is right, just simply one about political theory and the nature of the state, non-discrimination laws only strengthen the state and give the state rights
Well,
to the ability to interfere in people's freedom of association.
well, right. But this is a like return to the basic conundrum of ever arguing with a libertarian. Is of course they can they can weasel out of anything by just saying, "Does it strengthen the state?" Nope. I'm
I'm
out.
not weaseling. You know where I'm coming from.
I do know where you're coming from, but I also think, okay, and to be fair, I don't think you're necessarily coming from a libertarian view on this. I think you're coming from a fairly strict constitutionalist view. Or what it,
No, I haven't invoked the Constitution.
well, you're saying that you don't think that it is within, I mean, you're implicitly evoking the Constitution by saying that you don't think that it is within your rights to say that another person doesn't have the right to discriminate.
Right, because this is I mean. This is almost always ground zero for me. What are the constraints on my actions? Um, and one of the constraints on my actions
Was that a
is
9/11 joke, by the way? Ground Zero?
no. This is just where most political thought starts for me. Is what are the moral constraints on my actions?
Right.
And I do not think it is within my right to force you to associate with people whom you otherwise would not associate with. I don't think that's within
Okay.
my right. And because it's not within my right, I don't see how
Hmm.
I would suddenly be granted that right if I were wearing a hat that said government or the state. because the state is simply a collection of private actors. So I can think, wow, Dee's a horrible person for having a whites only sign in his sandwich shop in Jefferson City, Missouri, and I can post nasty Yelp reviews, and I can hold protests outside your shop. I can help mobilize the entire community to shut you the fuck down. That's fine, and that's probably what I should do. But I can't force you to serve people whom you are unwilling to serve.
And I would argue that as long as we're under a system, a state system that licenses and sanctions businesses, which you can say it shouldn't, but it
Sure.
does. So we have all types of regulations and protections in place for people who are moving on the free, even if we want to put this in monetary. I don't want to put it in moral terms because I think you're right. Like, I think that is the one point at which we agree. Like, I don't think that anti-discrimination laws change people's minds, except that generationally, eventually, like it seems ridiculous to us now that somebody would not serve a black person, right? Or that
Sure.
somebody
Yeah.
would not serve a woman
Right.
at a bar or something. That seems ridiculous to us now. But
Mm-hmm.
2 generations ago, it didn't seem ridiculous to a lot of people.
Right.
And so I
Right.
do think that like the rule of law does have a role to play, a longer term role to play in changing minds to a more liberal, non-discriminatory position.
Oh, I don't disagree with you at all there. I mean, and which is one reason relitigating the 1964 Civil Rights Act sinks straight to the bottom of my of my list of things to challenge. Yeah, I think that racial attitudes have improved. I mean, understatement, considerably over
Yeah.
the past several decades, in large part because the state enforces non-discrimination. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But you would still do away with those non-discrimination laws, even given that.
Yes. I mean, if I put in, again, very low on the list of priorities. Very low on the list of priorities. But if it's just a yes or no question, yes, I believe that people
Which
have
it
the
is,
right
yeah.
to associate or not associate with with whomever they want.
And that the state doesn't have a right to tell businesses who they do or do not serve based on any reason.
Right.
Interesting. I think you're wrong. I think
Oh, I know.
I think based just solely on a like very, and I think you can make an originalist argument that if the most important thing that we are given is guaranteed by law is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or protection of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that basic non-discrimination laws are perfunctory of that. So, or performative of that. And that because if pursuit of happiness and life and liberty is all wrapped up, in like where a person lives. So let's say that a person in the state of Alabama, for instance, let's say there's a town that decides that all the business leaders get together and they're like, we're not going to serve blacks in this town, or we're not going to serve. There was a county in Tennessee. This was around 2007. There was a county in Tennessee that said we are going to ban homosexuality here. But let's say even that they did it, which I was like, good luck. Like, I've always found a way to be really fucking gay. So let's say that they went about it and just said, like, our businesses are not going to serve faggots.
Well, wait a second, because if you're talking about
Not the state
local
doing that, but let's
governments,
just say, like, the local Better Business Bureau or because it's not a better business unless faggots aren't allowed there.
But wait, hold on a second. Can individual businesses within this particular area dissent and say, no, we have no problem serving
Oh, of
homosexuals?
course, but it's mob mentality. This is largely what the
Okay,
state exists to protect
okay.
against. I mean,
I
you would
think that's
just
a
say that the
short-term
state,
problem at
you would just
best.
say that the state's an alternate mob, but
Well,
um,
of course I do, but I think in the scenario that you're painting, to the extent that there is this cartel of discrimination where all the businesses in the area have agreed to discriminate, it is only a small amount or a very short amount of time before someone realizes an opportunity for competition in the fact that you have this homosexual market that is not being served on anything.
that's true, and we do have a lot of disposable income, so you really don't want to kick us out. But to say that like the scenario I'm providing is ridiculous is to completely ignore American business history for like the last.
Oh, I'm not ignoring it. You gave me a hypothetical.
I know, and I'm saying
You gave
like
me a
this
hypothetical in
is
the
a
present.
hypothetical that is completely parallel, except it's about sexuality and not about race, to the Jim Crow
Right.
South. And there were lots of places where, I mean, this is part of what causes the Great Migration of African Americans to cities in the North, is because the South becomes unlivable to them. And I don't mean like people are mean to them, I mean they don't have places to get buy groceries,
Mm-hmm.
hotels to stay in. They don't have
Mm-hmm.
doctors that will serve them. They don't
Mm-hmm.
have basic school. I mean, the list goes on. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that largely,
Right, but in this case, you're dealing with a government itself that is discriminatory and enforces discrimination.
well,
And to
right.
the extent that we are desegregating government and prohibiting government um, from having segregated schooling, for instance, as long as government provides
Well, right.
schooling,
Okay, so schooling
or
is not a good example
segregating
there, but
housing to the yeah,
but
okay,
all of those other are all the other examples, doctors, hospitals, grocery stores, hotels, restaurants, those are all private businesses. And they could discriminate under your
sure,
ideal legislative act, they could discriminate. And this is
yeah,
largely so the worst segregation that was done in the I don't want to say worst because all the segregation that was done in the Jim Crow
sure,
South was bad. But like probably the daily thing that made life horrible and unlivable for non-whites was not some grandiose like I have to use it's not even that grandiose, but like I have to use a different bathroom in the courthouse. It's I can't go to any restaurant in this town. It's my family can't stay in any hotel in this town. It's
mm-hmm,
there's not a hospital in this town that will serve me. I mean, this is largely why you get the opening of African American hospitals and doctors, but like they're so few and far between because they're underfunded, et cetera, et cetera. So like I'm arguing that probably the hardest part of living in the Jim Crow South was
sure.
likely private businesses doing what you're saying should still be legal.
Okay, again, you are.
And I'm
I'm
not
saying is
saying
that
the state would come in and sanction, like say, and protect. Well, I mean, they are by it being legal. They are protecting one's right to discriminate on the basis of race, sexuality, gender, etc.
hmm
And I think if the 1964 Civil Rights Act was in large part to combat the realities of living in the Jim Crow South,
hmm
then we learn nothing from it if we continue to allow discrimination such as being allowed in the Hobby Lobby case or such as being allowed in the.
Okay, wait a second. No, no. First of all, okay, I have to stop you there, and I just want to say one thing. One, this is you're just listing all the reasons that I have no desire to go back and relitigate the 1964 Civil Rights Act because I am not going to a second deny the difficulties and horrors of living in the Jim Crow South. I am going to say, however, that to compare the Hobby Lobby case, where a employer has declined to or wishes not to pay for contraceptive coverage for its employees, to living in the Jim Crow South, is a grotesque exaggeration
No, I'm
of the
so the comparison
of
itself
the
is
difficulties of
grotesque.
not having contraceptive
And I
coverage.
don't mean to put them on equal planes because they're not. But if, let's say, Hobby Lobby's corporate board is allowed to make health decisions about a woman's insurance and her personal health choices, such as to take birth control or not. What is to say that under that same precedence, Hobby Lobby could say something like, we really only believe that whites should be reproducing, and so we're only going to provide maternity care and maternity leave, and our insurance is only going to cover labor costs if you're a white woman.
Okay. I think Hobby Lobby's soon to go out of business.
I hope so. I mean, we don't need more tacky bedazzled shit in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We also just don't need more hateful people in the world. But so I don't want.
Okay, but let me just identify rhetorically what's going on here, because this is frequently what happens, and it's particularly
people bring
tricky.
up valid points, and
No, it is valid. I'm not denying any of that.
Let's
right,
pause and do our cat pause.
No, especially when these questions about freedom of association or freedom of religion center on issues of race, there is the desire of most interlocutors to prove they're anti-racist bona fides, right? My concern here is slightly different, right? My concern here in these questions, which almost never comes across, is what gives me the right to tell you whom you can and cannot associate with. That's the question I'm stuck on.
Well,
I'm not going to deny for a second the difficulties of living in the Jim Crow South and all of the horrors that entailed when you have a mixture of private and public discrimination, of government and private actors colluding to create a to ensure that people of color are second-class citizens. I'm not going to deny either that life in the Jim Crow South gets a hell of a lot better with the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and that the conditions of Black life have improved considerably as a result of state-enforced non-discrimination laws. That's not the conversation that's the conversation that I almost always end up having. The conversation that I always want to have is just a more theoretical one about what gives me the right as an individual. We can talk all day long and end up probably agreeing about the benefits for Black life in the South of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That still doesn't resolve the question for me of what gives me the right to tell you whom you can and cannot associate with.
Well, okay. Can I take that up? Oh.
No, but I just it's one of the things that makes me so nervous about having these conversations, because if you say something like, and I've had this happen on Facebook too. If you say something like, it's not clear to me why someone's right not to be discriminated against automatically trumps other people's right to practice their religion or to practice their freedom of association, the automatic accusation is racism, right? So that question, even asking the question is, hold on, I'm ranting. The question is invalidated
I was just
by...
with you, I wasn't interrupting.
Okay. The question itself... The question itself is kind of cast outside the realm of asking by people who just want to invite you to turn to the last few chapters of your American history book so that you can see how Libertopia has worked out in the Jim Crow South. And you're like, whoa, well, hold on, that's not the conversation that I'm having. That's not, that's an incredibly complicated question about how government and private actors collude to create horrible lives for people of color. That's not the question that I'm having. This began as a question about religious liberty and non-discrimination, and that's the question that I find most philosophically compelling. And it okay, so.
And I understand that. So I want to try to not just dismiss that question and to take it up. But I want to, because you're interested in the theoretical bent of
Sure.
policy, and I am too. I don't want to dismiss that. But
Hmm.
the thing that I would also say is that theory, the best theory, I would argue, takes into account history and the historical precedents that's brought us to this theoretical question that we're now asking. So if the theoretical question is what gives me the right to tell you not to discriminate in your
Hmm.
business practices,
Hmm.
let's take two theorists who might take up such a question. Let's take Foucault, who would provide probably way more historical context and make it more historically contextual than we would want, or would even be necessary, but would do a really thorough job of doing that. Versus a, let's say, he's having his own libertarian moment right now. Let's take Zizek.
Is he having a libertarian moment?
He is a far
I don't
left
know.
libertarian moment.
I
I
don't know
mean,
what a far
he's
left
all sorts. I
libertarian
mean,
moment
I
actually
find
means.
Zizek to be fairly politically abhorrent, generally. So,
I've lost touch, so I don't know.
well, you're not missing much with Zizek. Ever, actually. But so one of the complaints that people often launch at Zizek is that he doesn't really consider. He's very interested in the theoretical exercise for the divorced of historical context, and the fact is, legislating and politics and policy should take into account both.
Hmm.
So it should say what is the history of this and what has led us to this moment in a very like physical, real, lived sense. And it should also say, okay, so what within the framework of our rule of law, which is a theoretical exercise in and of itself, what gives me the right to change this or to build upon it or to take it away?
Hmm.
So that's I would just say that you're interested in a purely you're interested in a very theoretically bent exercise, and I am too. But I just want to stress again and again, like that's not devoid of context. And so I think at the end of the day, what we can say, or what I would say, is when you ask, like, what gives me the right to say that a business does not have the right to discriminate, we can look at the historical context and say, because I gave you both a theoretical in, which is that the people have the guaranteed right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a theoretical exercise in and
Hmm.
of itself. I don't know why I'm doing this.
I don't know why.
Um,
Okay.
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
So that's the theoretical in to saying the state could enforce non-discrimination laws. Coupled with, we have a really horrible historical record of what discriminatory practices
Sure. Hmm.
based on race, based on gender, based on
Hmm.
sexuality lead to in this country. And so let's
Hmm.
marry those two things and say having very strong non-discrimination laws might be really not only beneficial but might be legally allowed.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so I totally respect that. And we're.
America, number one, number one.
I think we're just going to come to the limits of a conversation that I'm even able to have because I'm not a constitutional scholar at the end of the day.
What's the
And
Constitution?
it's a document that was written. What do you mean? What is the Constitution?
I was joking. Bad joke.
Okay. Um,
Sorry.
right. So the question that you're trying to frame is within the realm of the state as it's currently formulated and with its current history of enforcing discrimination, right? Enabling and enforcing discrimination. Are non-discrimination policies not only intelligible, like constitutionally intelligible, but beneficial? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And that's, again, this is I keep going back to this. This is why relitigating the 1964 Civil Rights Act sits down there at the bottom of the list of things that I love to do.
What's at the top of that list?
What's at the top of that list? Just screaming taxation is theft.
Undoing the tax system.
Undoing the tax system.
When you pull the purse away, they can't buy anything.
It's true. Starve the beast. Defunding education. No. Your eyes got very big. But I guess I can only have that conversation only interests me for so long, because the bigger question is the state, and you make fun of me for this, but because I just keep coming back to it, but why is there a state? What is the state?
Right.
What makes the state legitimate? What empowers the state to do things that individuals can't? And so that's immediate. If you notice, that's immediately where I tried to shift the conversation, right?
Right.
What am I empowered to do? And what am I not empowered to do? Because I'm not going to disagree with you on the very real history of the horrors of segregation.
Right. I just want you. I mean, I think we got to a good point here where we both realized that came to a compromising position of realizing that both history and philosophy are important in this theoretical and lived experience of legislating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good point to come to, I think, with this discussion. Can I throw you
up? Oh, I was gonna try to have your conversation.
Oh,
your state enclosed conversation.
Okay.
Why does your right to practice your religion not, and I'll just keep using you as the hypothetical person here. Let's say you are let's say you're one of the people I met out on my hike this weekend who is clearly collecting snakes for his Sunday night church service. And let's say you go out on Monday and you refuse. What do you do for a living?
I'm a doctor who refuses to give vaccinations.
See, that's a trickier case. I'll totally give you that one. I was going to say you would refuse to fix my car or something. I was going to say something easy, like you refuse to, like I bring you, I'm clearly a homosexual with car problems. I come to your car shop and you're like, you see the sign and it says no faggots in here.
Except I would be like, welcome to my car shop. How are you planning on paying today?
Yeah, okay. We're getting off track. Why does my right not to be discriminated against in that particular case of, say, having my car fixed trump your right of religious freedom? Because you, for whatever stupid reason, have a belief that homosexuals do not deserve car service or your car service. I mean, keep in mind, I can go to the mechanic down the street. Because that is the case, right? That's the case in the bakery case too, right?
Yeah.
There are plenty of bakers who will bake a lesbian wedding cake.
They could have gone to fucking Whole Foods.
Right.
And Whole Foods would have probably put the lesbian cake on their Instagram and been like, look at how progressive we are. We baked this lesbian cake.
Exactly. So it is very rarely the case today that we come to someone being discriminated against for something that is immediately life-saving, right? Wedding cakes are not life-saving.
Well, right. But I think...
so that's why the vaccine case is trickier, because we are talking about often, like,
as
saving medical intervention.
Gay male embodiment of the Kathy cartoon, I can tell you that cake is sometimes life-saving. And that when I'm having a real bad case of the Mondays... No, so I think this is actually, that's a really good question, because auto mechanics, cakes, serving lunch, these things aren't like life-saving. But I think that one of the things...
And they're things that other people in the market are very eager to do for you.
Right. I mean, I think, I don't want to harp the historical record of this, but like, part of it is, through much of the South particularly, but this is probably true of like any rural area. Like there were oftentimes towns that had one diner or one.
Right. Well,
So
I'm not talking about now. I'm
it's
talking
talking about
about
now,
now.
right? And I think
Yeah.
so. This is an interesting. This is an interesting, like to me, this is an interesting policy
I'm trying to play
issue,
your game.
which is to say that I'm actually going to return and play your game and make the state seem really benevolent, which is to say that I don't want the state to have like more largesse than it needs. So I don't, if we're going to like get into saying like if you provide a like life-giving or protecting service, you can't discriminate, but if you're providing cakes, you can discriminate. Like that is going to require the expansion of the state vis-a-vis the methods by which it enforces. So it's going to require more police, more court systems, more public defenders, just more laws, because you're going to have like ordinance after like, okay, people can technically live with electricity, so are electricians allowed to discriminate on the basis of race or gender or sexuality? One doesn't really need to go to high school, so can high schools discriminate on, well, public high
No,
schools
we're
can.
not talking about
Right,
government
right.
funded services here.
So doesn't need um, one doesn't need to see a doctor because their mom is paranoid. Their two moms are paranoid. And so we could refuse them service. But I think that gets into like a very case by case, like, and that becomes very difficult for the state and the culture to manage. It becomes very unwieldy pretty quickly, I think. Because, okay, I can't believe I'm about to say this. In a purely philosophical sense, divorced from historical context and everyday kind of like functionality, I agree with you. I don't think I have the right, on a purely like uncontextualized basis, I don't think I have the right to tell you what to do with your business. But when we add in context and when we add in that we don't want the state to get so bogged down in unnecessary extra legislation, I think we get to the point of saying we need.
Said the man who wants single payer health care. Keep going.
That's not this episode. We're not talking about healthcare. We can. But so I think we get blanket legislation, which is largely what non-discrimination laws are, right? So a business cannot discriminate on the basis of X, Y, and Z.
But why don't we just have an equally simple law that says people are free to practice their religion unless they're depriving someone else of their life, liberty, or property?
But then
And
that
will
becomes
allow you
highly
to turn away
contextual. So
that will just simply that is simply just a.
One-
I don't think you answered the question of why your right not to be discriminated against trumps my right to religious liberty or freedom of
well,
association.
I said that on a purely philosophical level it doesn't. But what I'm saying that when we have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, one of the things, I mean, that is highly contextualized in the sense that what makes me happy is the pursuit of cake.
Right, and what makes me happy is not serving faggots. No, I mean, that's all I have to say, right? I mean, you are compromising my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness by forcing me to do something that I otherwise wouldn't do.
And
I totally get you like cake. And there's some bakeries down there that will bake you a cake or fix your car or whatever.
And I guess what I would argue back at you is you are fully allowed to open a bakery in a place that you don't have to serve faggots. For instance, I hear that the wedding business in Chechnya is really booming right now, and you might want to. Too soon for a Chechnya joke?
Just
I think
never
that
with me. Never with me. Um,
safe space, safe space. Um, I think that you might want to get a business permit in Chechnya
no,
to.
you're not answering the question. You have deprived me in this case of my liberty and the pursuit of happiness within America because you say I'm doing it wrong. And you say that your right to the pursuit of happiness, which in this case means getting cake.
But we make those judgments all the time.
I know, and they're really hard. And again, it is
I'm
not
not saying it's
clear.
easy, but what I'm.
But it is. Hold on. It is not clear to me, and why your right not to be discriminated against trumps my right to religious freedom and freedom of association. In fact, I would say that because I've got two rights at stake, my religious freedom and my freedom of association, it does outrank yours. It's a 2-1.
Ooh. And I've just got 3 words for you, Will. Love trumps hate.
Well, you can bring your little faggot army to my. How did I become the discriminator? To
Well, earlier you had me having a sandwich shop in Jeff City with a whites only sign outside. So fuck you.
Well, like you have an interest in being not discriminated against. I get that, right? But if I'm the discriminator, I have a right to associate with whom and who I don't want to associate with. I may or may not have a religious belief that leads me to not want to associate or to disassociate with certain groups.
Mm-hmm.
I have a property holding and let's just assume it's a just property holding within the place of business that I own and operate.
Property is theft.
I have bodily autonomy that it can't simply be conscripted into performing a service for you. Somehow you're going to say that it's more important that I bake you a cake anyway than that all of those rights that I have and that we generally recognize are protected. Racist win.
Well,
Racist win.
I mean, this is so okay. Can I make a confession?
Uh-huh.
So this is why I get frustrated with the LGBT community sometimes, is because like I hear the cake story and I'm like, it's a fucking cake.
Sure.
Like, go to the Whole Foods across town or go to another bakery.
No, I'm with you. Yeah. No, you and I are right. You and I have talked about this.
Yeah,
sure.
we agree. But like, I also do understand the slippery and ascribe to, on some levels, the slippery slope argument of if you're going to allow that discrimination, what stops you from disallowing discrimination in other ways? And I think at the end of the day, I am more convinced by that it is best that we have blanket non-discrimination laws so that what is considered a life-giving or life-guaranteeing or protection right service would always be guaranteed, and that we can never call into question, like, is this an actual right or is this a luxury, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's partially what you're arguing, is that the cake is a luxury. The cake is not a right. Though in my America, cake is a right.
I know. Well, I'm also arguing that I'm not particularly worried about that slippery slope, especially to quote my favorite politician, Barack Obama. The arc of history bends towards justice.
Barack Hussein
Obama. I'm not particularly worried in a resurgence of discriminatory businesses because I do tend to believe that one of the things a free market discourages is discrimination. The case about the cake, I think you and I have little but contempt for people who treat the cake case as if it is heralding the coming of the return of the Third Reich or something.
Right.
It is really just a cake, and there are plenty of people who are willing to bake cakes for lesbian couples. And that business should just give them a bad Yelp review and move on with your
Right.
life. I don't fear a slippery slope where if you allow the bakery to not bake lesbians a cake, the next thing you know, all homosexuals are, you know, living in Section 8 housing because they can't get mortgage loans from
Right.
local banks. No, I don't. That's just paranoia. And that's coming. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's just paranoia.
Yeah.
We're going to have to end this because it's 10:30.
Okay, I have one quick question for
Okay.
you. Is it hot in here or is it just me?
I'm going to go.